Today, Lake Norman is one of North Carolina's best-known lakes. Its shoreline stretches more than 520 miles across 4 counties. There are marinas, state parks, waterfront neighborhoods, fishing boats, and communities built around the water. Some know Lake Norman as home to many of NASCAR's biggest names. Others through family vacations or afternoons spent on the lake. To many people today, it feels permanent, familiar. But beneath the water are the stories of communities that came before it. Over the first 2 episodes of this series, we explored life before the lake. We talked about loss, preparation, and what happened as the water began to rise. But history didn't end when the flooding began. The water changed where people lived. It changed how they traveled. It changed how communities connected to one another. Some families stayed, others moved. Communities adapted in different ways. They built new routines, new traditions, and new lives around a changing landscape. And sometimes adaptation meant finding new ways to navigate everyday life, including getting to school. But this story isn't only about what communities lost. It's about what they created, because adaptation isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like taking a boat to high school. Katie remembers what that looks like. And as you get older, as a teenager, how did you interact with the lake?
Well, all the rich kids lived on the lake, and they all had pools, and they all had boats, and they all, they were all going to school with us because everyone went to North Mac High School. So I actually had a friend whose parents bought property on the north end at Mooresville, and my friend would have to take a boat across Lake Norman in the mornings over to Torrance Chapel Road where other kids were driving to school. And so for her senior year in high school, she rode a boat to Torrance Chapel Road, then rode from Torrance Chapel over to North Mac High School and then back every day.
Now, see, I would almost say that's country, but that's not country. That's more lakey.
Yeah,
I never like you take a boat to school.
Yeah, I know. She'd just take her little motorboat and come on this side of the lake, and there'd be a couple cars. There are people that were waiting for Lakers who got kind of cut off because it was a long way to drive from up there and come down the interstate.
Yeah.
So
because
you could cut the boat. You could get the boat across there pretty fast.
Was 77 already created by that time?
No, I don't remember it. If it was just like a 2-lane road. I'm pretty sure it started off small. I mean, they didn't want to have to drive all the way over to Mooresville, over to through Cornelius, through Huntersville, then through that big long draw. They if they could just get over and get to somebody's car. So yeah. That's all we did.
It's like, I'm
Bummer
sorry,
ride.
Teacher. Right? Like, I'm sorry, teacher. There was boat traffic on the lake today.
Yeah, boats were slow today.
The lake changed geography. Over time, unfamiliar routes became ordinary. People learned where it was safe to travel and what remained beneath the surface. Old roads, structures, and traces of communities that existed long before Lake Norman became a familiar name. Navigating the lake required memory. Katie remembers that too.
You had to be careful where you put that boat because there could be a pole from somebody's front porch, in the mud under the water. Mm-hmm. And, we didn't want to have to rescue anybody. We just said be careful.
Could you see the tops of houses as well?
Well, you could in some places, yeah. Mm-hmm. You had to really, if you were a boater when they were filling, I don't think they encouraged that because you don't know what's been moved because something up the river or lake had been moved. So you can't assume you can go from there to Grandma's house in a boat and not hit something. You had to really be aware of what you were what you could see and what you could see what other people had, been through. So,
but life around the lake wasn't only about learning the water. It was about gathering, creating routines, building memories around new traditions. For many families, fish camps became part restaurant, part community space, and part everyday life. For Katie, they became part of her story.
I worked at a fish camp when I was in college. That was a big fish camp. And when
Okay, you have to explain what fish camps are because I did not know
what
what they were until I moved up here. In North
really
Carolina. Yeah, we don't.
we have a bunch of them.
Yeah, and maybe it's because of the
Used to.
area I'm from. I didn't have a fish camp in that area. Maybe down in the Low Countries of South Carolina. But what's a fish camp?
Well, I grew up going to the one that was on Huntersville Road, and it's just a place that specializes in fish, flounder. The kids always got the cheap flounder, and the parents would get, good fish, and you have hush puppies, and you have slaw and good iced tea. But of course, everybody had good iced tea down here. But I'm just saying that it was just specifically for seafood, and they liked it because they caught a lot of their fish free. And I couldn't tell you the name of the restaurant, but I worked there for a good while. And after we'd get off, and we'd be sweating from being over grease boiling, and somebody'd have a boat, and we'd go out there and just jump in the lake.
As communities adapted to the lake, people also found new ways to create belonging. For some families, the lake became a place to teach children to swim, to spend time together, and for Black families navigating a changing South, spaces for recreation and community often had to be built intentionally. Michael Connor remembers those places and the people who helped create them.
And it did come to where they said, and my uncles made a pier, made a pier so they can go out there. My uncles got a boat. One of them had a canoe at one time, and eventually they bought a motorboat. My uncle and aunt had adopted two little boys, foster kids, and they were teaching them how to swim in the lake. We would fish at the lake now. My aunts were very good at that, catching these, catfish. And so we'd have a lot of fish fries and things like that. And when they had the Lakeview Country Club, that's what they would serve, would be the fish that they had caught from the lake and stuff. And that's when the lake was good. You don't want to eat out of that lake today because there's so much stuff is in there now. It's just terrible. They had sludge, everything is bad. But back in the day, it was pretty good, and people would come up and fish.
The story of Lake Norman isn't only about flooded communities or changing landscapes. It's about the spaces people built afterward. Places where music played late in the evening, where families gathered, where feeling welcome mattered. For many, Lakeview Country Club became one of those places. What started as the Carner Family Recreation Center eventually became known far beyond the Lake Norman area. Michael Connor explains.
And at the Lakeview Country Club, after the water got up, they would have the reunions from high schools and things like that. African Americans didn't have any big outlets back in that time. And so Lakeview Country Club served as that, because you would have to go all the way up to the state beach up in north, going towards Statesville to go to a park or anything. Matter of fact, most of our parks, they didn't have like Six Flags over Georgia, Carowinds. All of that did not exist at the time, and we weren't privy to go to those places. We had Carolina Beach, which you have Myrtle Beach now. We couldn't go to Myrtle Beach. We could only go to the Carolina Beach. And so, with the water coming up, gave us some place to go that wasn't so far away, that we could we could easily drive there, and people took advantage of that.
Places like Lakeview did more than provide entertainment. They created space for gathering, for joy, for feeling welcome, for building community. And much like the teenagers Katie remembered taking boats to school, people also arrived at Lakeview by water, pulling boats onto the shore to hear music, spend time together, and gather in a place many still remember decades later. According to a 2021 article by Paige Leggett in South Park Magazine, visitors sometimes arrived in such large numbers that when boat parking ran out, people would swim the rest of the way to shore. The article describes Lakeview as a place remembered for music, community, and a spirit simply described as peace and love. For Michael Connor, Lakeview represented something communities built intentionally, a place where black families gathered, where community formed, and where belonging could be created in a changing landscape. But even spaces built for belonging face change. Also, how much did he lose? How much did he gain from the rising of Lake Norman and this property that he got a chance to buy in a time when men who looked like him weren't given that chance often?
Right, right. Well, he lost about 65 point something acres of land, went under the water. And they called it distressed property. So he didn't get paid a lot for that. But the thing is, his family, his sons and daughters, they sold to a developer named Simonini. And he formed that into Connor's Key. And because it was sort of historic land, they were able to get a tax break off of it as well. Reggie White, the football player, was one of the, people that bought the property there, but he passed away in 2005 and eventually his family left. There's NASCAR people that live in that development, about 23 homes. They even did a movie in that area as well. So the people that came later after his kids sold it, they did quite well with it. And now the property has still, real estate is still going up. It's almost like a gentrification without saying it's being gentrified. Um, there was another guy named Pleasant lived there at one time, and he eventually moved. So basically, you have a lot of Caucasians that live there, and no black families live there anymore. But that part is where the Lakeview Country Club was. And around that Lakeview Country Club were all of my grandfather's kids' homes.
Over time, landscapes change again. Families grow older, property passes to new generations. Some descendants stay, others leave. Land that once held family histories becomes something different. The Connor family, like many others around Lake Norman, experienced those changes firsthand. And beneath conversations about acreage or development is another question. What does it mean to inherit land? And what happens when the people connected to that land are gone?
My dad never wanted to be on the lake. And that's a good thing for me because I don't want to pay those taxes. So I'm right on the road. And so I'm pretty good. And so I think Grandpa wanted us to stay together. But like he said, what is land if you don't have anyone to share it with? And I think my family, like a couple of weeks ago, came up here and we just had a cookout and everything. It's like, yeah, now the family's even bigger than what it was, but they don't know the history here. They never came up here on the weekends. They weren't grown. They have no idea of what country life was like. We got the city life and country life, you know, combined. It was all mixed with us. They have no idea what that's like. We had some cousins come down from New York and they said, "What are these things on the trees?" And it was like we had peaches and things. They said, "Peaches on trees?" They had no idea. New York, everything's asphalt. They had no idea that you can grow stuff here. Yeah, man, that's why it's here. So those things have changed. Across the street where it used to be cornfields, there are 4 houses there now. And one with a swimming pool, as a matter of fact. But we had no idea that that's what was going to happen. But the property has been sold, and people on John Connor Road think it's named after John Connor, the Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And we got to tell them, no, it's not. I go to parties that they have sometimes, and I have, no, John Connor was a real man. He was a farmer here. And then I let him in on what John Connor was about, that he was a cultivator, not a terminator. And he wanted to cultivate not only the land, but he wanted to cultivate his relationships with people as well. So that's what he lived for. So yeah, it's totally different, now that he's gone. But some of the values that he instilled in us that we've been able to pass on is still there. family is still very important. That unity that you must have. You can't sell everything. At least treasure what you do have, and share it with everybody that's around you.
When Michael Connor talks about John Connor, there's pride in his voice. He's talking about his grandfather, a man remembered through land, community, and a road that still carries his name. A black man who built, gathered people together, and whose legacy remained even as the landscape around him changed. And maybe that's what legacy really is. Not only what survives on maps or names remembered on roads, but what survives in families. Lessons from grandparents, moments on the farm, the kinds of memories that never appear on street signs, but shape generations all the same. When Michael Connor reflects on legacy, many of his memories return not to the buildings or property, but to his grandparents. I mean, it sounds like your grandfather set you up and everybody else for such a grand life. Like you said, like he put the roots down so
Yes,
that y'all could grow stronger.
exactly, exactly, exactly. And when you come from good roots, man, I mean, that's where you have your own self confidence, and you can go out there and do anything you want to do. You know, he didn't say, because I remember one summer I came to help him in the fields, and he said, now here, take this hoe, just hoe around the little leaf there, that little plant, and you just go through that whole row. Well, that was a long row, and I'm hoeing and stuff. Grandpa came up there. Boy, you cutting up all the plants. Oh no, go inside, go home, go inside. Janie, come and get him. He's cutting up the plants. Yeah, we ain't gonna have no watermelon. Go, boy. Well, I was tired anyway, man, so I went in the house and I went to sleep after that, had my little straw hat on, and out they come. I must have been about 8 years old, but he said, "No, you're not the farmer. No, 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 boy, it's not for you." And he would see you eating a watermelon, and he would go, "Boy, you don't have to eat that watermelon down to the rind. Get you another one. There's a lot of them out there." Because you're thinking, that hey, we may not have enough to go around with everybody. But there's enough for everybody. I mean, when you think about it, I remember there was a lady down in Monroe, and she would be running kids away from her apple tree. Well, the apple tree is full of apples. She can't eat all of them. Why are you running the people away? When we would come up, my aunts would go, and my dad's name was Cheese. Get them kids up there. It's not time to pick those plums. Well, that didn't stop us. We picked the plums. They were green as they could be, hard as they could be. We get lockjaw. We get home. Mom had medicine right in the refrigerator that we could get because we were going to do what we wanted to do, man. Yeah, but we had fun. Figs and all these things, all the different fruits and stuff that we ate growing up. The store was not good enough for the things that we could get outside the store. And now all that stuff is expensive.
For Michael Connor, family history doesn't stop with childhood memories. The stories stretch further back to grandparents, to great grandparents, to choices made generations earlier, moves, sacrifices, and risk taken without knowing what future they might create. Because legacy isn't only what one generation leaves behind, it's also what becomes possible for the next. Mr. Connor reflects on those connections and the people who came before him. A lot of listeners may only see Lake Norman as a place for boating or vacation homes. What would you want them to know about the lives, labor, and love that existed here existed here long before the water came?
That the history that was here before the water came. These people came from somewhere. Like I said, my great grandfather was born in 1855, and that's 10 years before the Civil War. And he came over here from Lincolnton, and he could have stayed where he was, but no, he kept moving, and he did as much as he could so the next generation can enjoy even more than what he could. And that history can't be lost, because had it not been for them, we wouldn't be here. Had he not made that move from Lincolnton, we'd still be somewhere up in Lincolnton, maybe, or not here at all. Uh, and the sacrifices that they made. Because my great aunt, who died in 2016 at 105 years old, she said she had a horse when she was growing up. They used to take the horse when her father would go to a meeting or something. She said they'd have their brother, John Connor, my grandfather, take them to Concord, and then they'd bring the horse back, and John would have to wipe the horse down so that his father wouldn't know that it had been riding and all the sweat was off of it and everything. So the fun that they had, they could go but so far. And so now our generation can go but so far because of what that generation did. Everything is dependent on the last people that came before us. And we must never forget the people that came before us, because it makes the people that we are today. And we must put something in the kitty so that the folk that are coming after us will have something to share as well. Because you don't know who you are unless you know what your roots are. I remember Betty Davis telling me when I was in California, she said, "You must have come from good stock." And I said, and I never thought about it. I said, yeah.
Betty Davis, the actress?
Oh, yeah. I was a personal assistant with Betty Davis when I was in California. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, I forget. Sometimes I bring these things up and people go, "Really?" And I say, "Oh, yeah.
The stories Michael Connor shares are deeply personal, but they also point toward a larger question. What happens to memory when landscapes change? When communities disappear? When the people who remember begin to age? For historians, preserving the past often begins with listening. Dr. Richard Eller has spent years documenting communities shaped by change, because sometimes history survives in photographs, and sometimes in the people willing to tell their stories. Final question about Long Island, now submerged under Lake Norman. What do you think is most important for people today to remember about it?
I think it, I think it, like I think it fires the imagination because there's a lost city down there. There is a whole town that is submerged underwater that we can't get to. That sort of creates an idea of, well, what must it have been like? I mean, it's kind of like living on another planet. You can't get there to see it, so it does make you wonder. Well, what was that like? How did it work? Now, there's pictures, that some of these folks I interviewed took of it before it left, but does it look like that? We don't know.
Are there any, I said one more question. I have one more about this. Are there any personal stories that have like stuck with you the most in your research?
Not really. When I interviewed these folks, I did so because they it's kind of weird. They have such a connection to a place that's no longer there that it inspires you to try to figure out, well, what was this place like? How did this work? And they were very communal with each other. I mean, they all knew each other. They weren't necessarily related, but they all had the same experiences. So when we did the oral interviews and put them together, instead of one person telling their story about everything, I found 9 different categories that they all kind of touched on in one way or another, and you could put it together like that. That's how I remember baseball because everybody talked about baseball, going to the games, what that was like. That was a big part of their summer, and it stretched on into fall. It started into the spring and went on into fall. So they were playing baseball probably a good 9 months out of the year.
Places may disappear beneath water, communities change, but memories can remain remarkably detailed. The routines, the schools, the baseball teams, the ways neighbors become something closer to family. For Richard Eller, those stories hold value far beyond nostalgia. And so, what drew you to this story?
It's just the kind of weirdness of it. I mean, I live by a couple actions, historians. One is when is the best time to plant a tree? And the answer is 25 years ago. When's the second best time? Now. So you should get the story. And the other one is an old African proverb that says, when an elderly person dies, a library burns down. So if you don't get it, whenever you can get that story from them, and a lot of elderly elders in our community are willing to tell these stories if we're willing to listen. And I think they've got a gold mine of experiences that it's kind of like the thing you were talking about with the dope. When they first said it, and it wasn't them, but when I first heard that term, I thought, what are they talking about? And it took me a while, and I had to ask questions, to finally figure out what it was. That's something that has come and gone. And I think that's a fascinating part of history is what has come and gone. And did we really want to lose it, or do we try to recapture it by talking about it with the hopes that maybe some part of it comes back? Because there is really something to admire about all these people that live in that the community of Long Island. They're tight. And you don't see that amongst people who live, in my neighborhood. I may or may not know who my neighbors are. They all knew. They were, there was a book done by UNC. I had to read it when I was in grad school, but it's a great book called Like a Family. And it talks about life in the cotton mill and how all of these people, because of common cause, common interest, working the same jobs, that they all became like a family. I mean, it was an apt title.
The creation of Lake Norman reshaped communities, but historian Chuck McShane suggests the story may be more complicated than simple destruction. Many of the changes happened over years of planning, and the landscape looked very different than it does today. Chuck reflects on what surprised him while researching Lake Norman's history. In your research, did anything surprise you about the creation of Lake Norman or the communities it replaced?
I think what surprised me probably was how long term the thinking was that went into the creation of it. I think that's maybe what lended it to maybe that there was a little bit less disruption than I would have expected, because it had been planned for so long, that there's such a forward-looking approach to it that it seems that, at least from the people I've spoken with for this book, there was a little less disruption of the communities that were there because it wasn't as densely populated to begin with, and it didn't grow as much as some other areas that may have been destroyed for a variety of projects during this time period, especially. So that there wasn't as much. I wouldn't say there wasn't as much loss, but
Planning for the future and preserving the past aren't always the same thing. Communities focused on growth don't always stop to document what they're leaving behind. Chuck says that realization often comes later. Do you think enough has been done to preserve or tell the stories of the people who once lived in the area?
I think more has recently. I think Davidson College did quite a bit on it. I don't think enough was done at the time necessarily, so we're kind of backtracking in a lot of ways and trying to capture it before it totally disappears. People who actually remember this, but I think in general, I think in general you don't really know what you have until it's gone. So I think we're trying to kind of backfill the memory now, whereas perhaps more could have been done during the time. But I think people were, and during this time in particular, and in this place in particular, people were fairly forward-looking. So they're looking to the future as opposed to preserving the past.
For Dr. Eller, that work continues, whether documenting local histories, communities in Hickory, or unexpected stories from the Carolinas. The goal remains the same: to make sure stories survive. So, how has your research led you now to connect this theme of memory, place, and community to other projects?
It's always there. Anytime you can find a subject upon which two or more people have experienced, you'll see it everywhere. It pops up all the time. Last year, I guess it was about this time, I was doing a thing on the soapbox derby in Hickory. For 6 years, they had a soapbox derby, and there were a bunch of these guys who had participated. Even one woman, she was had a soapbox derby racer, and they all talk about the same thing. So you see it everywhere you go in any story.
And are there any future projects that you want to talk about that you're working on now?
Yeah, I'm working with one. There was a team in Hickory called the Untouchables. They were a high school African American high school football team that had a perfect season. Nobody scored on them on their way to the state championship. And what we're doing with it now is trying to. I think it's just a marvelous story about how a group of individuals on a team can come together and be perfect. So we did a documentary on it. You can go watch it on YouTube. Just keywords like CVCC, Untouchables, that sort of thing, and you'll find it. But we're trying to tell it in theatrical form as a play. And so, with the music of the time and the experience of them, we're building these composite characters. And I think it's another way for another generation to see what those guys were like, because there's no film of the team. And we tried to find film of them on the field and just could not. So we're doing the next best thing. We're recreating it.
Throughout this series, we've talked about what disappeared beneath Lake Norman: roads, communities, family land, places where people gathered. But maybe the harder question isn't what was lost. Maybe the question is, what remains? Perhaps the answer lives in unexpected places, in fish camps and family stories, in roads named after ancestors, in memories passed between grandparents and grandchildren, in historians listening carefully before stories disappear. Because history doesn't survive on its own. Someone has to remember. Someone has to carry it forward. Someone has to tell the story. And perhaps that's what the people in this episode have done. Not simply preserve the past, but leave something behind for the next generation. Thank you for listening to Made in Carolina. Special thanks to Michael Connor, Katie Dickinson, Dr. Richard Eller, and historian Chuck McShane. Music by Sister Sai. Research sources and other sound credits are available in the show notes. I'm Lolita Rowe. And remember, every lake has a story, sometimes just beneath the surface.